All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to unpack one of the most debated, most controversial corporate rescues in modern history. We're talking about the 2008 government bailout of General Motors.
I mean, think about it. This is a question that really shook the entire country. GM, this wasn't just some company. It was a symbol, right? A symbol of American industrial power. So when it looked like it was about to just disappear, it forced a decision that, we are still arguing about today.
So to really get why the bailout even happened, we've got to rewind a bit. We need to look at why GM was in such a fragile spot to begin with. You know, this wasn't some sudden thing that just popped up in 2008. Nope. The cracks in this giant's foundation had been forming for a long, long time. Okay, so for years, GM was kind of struggling to keep up. Their cars, a lot of the time, just felt a step behind their competitors, from Japan and Europe. They made some bad calls on innovation, and their lineup just wasn't changing fast enough for what people wanted to buy. Those were huge problems, for sure. But the real killer, the anchor that was dragging the whole company down, was this thing called legacy costs.
So what does that even mean, legacy costs? Well, think of it like this. Every single time GM made a car, a big chunk of the price tag had nothing to do with steel or tires or even the person building it. It was going to pay for the pension and healthcare promises made to generations of retired workers. Now, imagine you're a newer car company. You don't have that massive financial weight. It's like you're running a race, but GM is running it with a giant backpack full of rocks. It just made it so hard for them to compete, and that problem was just getting bigger and bigger every single year. All right, so you've got this giant, GM, already kind of wobbling on its feet, and then, bam! The hurricane hits, the 2008 global financial crisis. That was the massive external shock that took all of GM's deep-seated problems and turned them into a 5-alarm fire, practically overnight.
And I mean, things went south fast. When the whole financial system just froze up, getting a car loan became almost impossible. And what happens then? Well, people just stopped buying cars. Auto sales in the US fell off a cliff. For a company like GM, with those huge costs we just talked about, having your income just vanish like that, it was basically a death sentence. By December of that year, they were totally running on fumes.
This quote really nails it. It wasn't just the bad economy, and it wasn't just GM's own problems. It was the perfect storm, this brutal collision of both, that brought this American icon to its knees.
So here we are. GM is literally weeks, maybe days, away from having zero cash. And the US government has this impossible choice on its hands. Do you let a pillar of the American economy just crumble and risk taking millions of jobs down with it? Or do you do something that's never been done before and step in with a rescue that you know is going to be incredibly controversial? Yeah, just let that sink in for a second. The single largest industrial bankruptcy in the history of the United States. I mean, the sheer scale of this potential failure was just mind-boggling. And from the government's perspective, they felt like their hands were tied. They had to do something to stop the whole economy from collapsing. So what was the price tag for this rescue? A cool $50 billion. That's how much taxpayer money was eventually put on the line to keep General Motors from just being sold off for parts. It's a staggering number, but it was a staggering crisis.
So how did they actually pull this off? Well, it wasn't as simple as just handing over a giant check. First, they gave GM some emergency loans just to keep the lights on day to day. Then, a special White House auto task force was put together to basically manage a complete overhaul of the company. That led to this, managed bankruptcy. It's where the government could wipe out a lot of the old problems and create a brand new GM. And yeah, for a while there, the US Treasury was its biggest donor.
All right, so after all the dust settled, what did this new GM actually look like? The whole point was to create a version of the company that was actually built to survive and hopefully thrive in the modern world.
And wow, the difference between the old GM and the new GM was like night and day. Gone was this huge bloated company with a bunch of brands that were losing money. Think Pontiac, Saturn. What emerged was a much leaner company focused only on its heavy hitters, Chevy, Buick, GMC, and Cadillac. They got rid of a mountain of debt, renegotiated their labor contracts, and brought in totally new leadership. It was a really painful process for a lot of people, but from a business perspective, it had to be done.
Now, the surgery may have saved the patient, but boy, did it start an argument.
This whole thing kicked off one of the biggest political firestorms of the last few decades. The central question, was this a heroic act to save the economy, or was it a massive, dangerous government overreach? And you really had two very clear camps here. On one side, you had supporters saying, look, if we let GM go under, it would have started a domino effect, costing maybe 1 million jobs and making the recession way, way worse. We had to do it. They saw it as a necessary evil. But on the other side, you had critics who were absolutely furious. They called it corporate welfare, basically rewarding a company for decades of bad decisions. And they were worried it set a terrible precedent, this idea of a moral hazard, where other giant companies might think, hey, let's take crazy risks. If it all goes wrong, the government will just bail us out.
And that's really the heart of the whole thing, isn't it? This one question captures the entire dilemma. It's that classic tug-of-war. Do you solve the massive crisis right in front of you, even if it means creating a risky new precedent for the future?
At the end of the day, this whole saga wasn't just about one car company. It fundamentally redrew the lines. It changed the entire conversation in this country about what the government's role should be when it comes to private business, especially for these huge companies that are considered too big to fail.
So, the new GM? It survived. It actually did pretty well. So by that metric, you could say the rescue worked. But it leaves us with this huge, lingering question, a really important one. We know what it cost to save GM this time, but what's the price going to be for the next one? That's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me.